Hello and welcome to another WeAreDevelopers Live. And we forgot to set up the stage to basically not show our guests. So that is well done. Good stuff. So today we have somebody. Come again?
Sorry, Chris, didn't mean to cut you off then. It's just none of that seemed to go very well on my end. I mean, this is a nice, smooth, very live intro, isn't it? The intro piece just didn't play, so I had to click it about 10 times. Let's carry on.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, anyways, we're live, and as you can see, and it's all over the shop at the moment. There's a cat dad picture, and I've got my mug with my dog, so that makes actually more sense. Cat dad, seriously? Anyways,
before I had a real kid, but yeah, there you go.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Cool. So we're here, and we have one of the people who actually helped us with the World Congress as well, Julia Kordick here. You work for Microsoft.
Yeah, that's
and you also were moderating the main stage of Microsoft, which I just cut the last few days. How was that as an experience?
It was quite interesting because I actually never moderated a stage before, and it was always like I was always late. I was late for doing introductions. I was late for asking questions. Sometimes I totally did not really get what. So I was looking at the LinkedIn profiles of our speakers, right? But sometimes what the people really do and what they write in the LinkedIn profiles does not really match. So it was quite an experience, but it was quite fun. I would totally do it again.
You know, you could use the app of the Congress, which the bio of all the speakers were in there as well.
I tried, but there was sometimes outdated information. And I told the people that they did not update the information from the last years, and they were like, "Oopsie."
Okay. So yeah, there was people that were in the system before, and they basically just copied and pasted their old bio. That was the problem then, I guess. Yeah. I mean, editing these videos, I also just wrote a blog post about like what not to do on stage if you want to have a good recording of your talk. Because it's incredible how many speakers just basically wanted to make my life miserable. You know, like you have this audio file that basically shows your intro and they started talking over it. So you had like the audio and their speech at the same time. Then they kept talking about things that don't make sense in the recording, like, oh, and then you can go over there to our booth and see us there. Just go to the left, past the toilets and stuff. And nobody online would care about that at all. Like or like there's a raffle at 4 o'clock, make sure you're there for it. So okay, that recording makes no sense. And it was just like so many things that are so simple to avoid. And I think as a speaker, it's very important to actually consider the recording because you reach so many more people. You reach, it multiplies by 10, by 20 at times. And also it makes it possible for people months later to find your talk of the Congress and get excited by it. But they can't get excited about it if you start talking about things that they can't see. You know, like people in the audience, like, show of hands, how many of you are? Oh, that's the thing. And I'm like, at least say how many it were then, you know, to give it a feature like that. So it was interesting to see. Also, you switched from presenting to moderating and in between, and then you presented with another person at one time. So you were all over the stage, aren't you?
Yeah, I was all over the stage and I was all over the Microsoft booth basically all the time. Yeah, it was quite stressful. Quite stressful days for me. Also, the first day at WeAreDevelopers, there were the workshops, and I was also part of the workshop as a workshop coach.
Cool. So what is your job in Microsoft like for the moment? Because there's reorgs every 2 months anyway. So, but what are you doing at the moment?
So what I'm doing, I'm part of a team which is called like Global Black Belts, which is like super cool, right? Never can get a better title than that, I guess. And what Global Black Belts do, they are basically subject matter experts. So there are very different types of Global Black Belts, and I'm one for the whole part of developer productivity and DevOps. And where we usually support at Microsoft is either in two cases. The one is there's like a super strategic project at a customer for Microsoft where we need to create technical clarity. There's where people like me get in to prove basically that the technology we are suggesting or the solution is actually suitable. So this is the one thing. Or something is oddly weird or oddly off or oddly interesting, kind of the edge cases. For example, I'm currently exploring a customer project where a customer is using Devin by Cognition AI. And we want to understand why that customer is using Cognition AI's product Devin and how we can compare it to GitHub Copilot to also discover like white spaces in our product. This is basically what I do.
Cool. It's interesting that black belt used to be like a certification in Cisco and in Six Sigma. So it seems like there's confusion in the market about like what to call what. But then again, I had the same job for like 20 years and 15 different job titles, so it's not that thing. But it was interesting to see that they took on that thing from judo about the different parts. But there's no green belts and there's no white belts, right?
No, you're either nothing or a black belt.
Okay. That's that odd. But it's interesting because I also worked in a department that was touching lots of other departments in the company, and I think that's a very interesting thing in a place like Microsoft, that when you're in a department like that and you're not just a person to do like change the font of the things of that setting in Teams, but actually have to deal with everybody out there. So how did that whole integration with GitHub Copilot work out? Like, is it a thing where there's still like trench fights between GitHub and Microsoft, or is it just something that they integrate as a third party?
So it was progressing over the last year. So at the very, very beginning, so when we bought Microsoft in 2018, there was like a very strict distribution between Microsoft and GitHub product groups, and there was not really a communication at all. But currently, in the last 2 years, these two organizations get closer together. So there are now Microsoft product teams who are also developing certain parts of GitHub Copilot for GitHub Copilot extensions, or certain GitHub Copilot integrations into Visual Studio, for example. So it really starts to mix up, and these product groups and also different motions of product groups are slowly growing together. Same with the sales. GitHub sales and Microsoft sales are getting closer together over the time.
It's an interesting one, because I remember when GitHub was bought and people are like, oh my God, they're going to kill it now because it's Microsoft. But I'm like, it makes total sense. Like if a company like a bank or an insurance company wants to actually use GitHub, they wouldn't have done it if it's a startup in San Francisco, especially not a German bank. But with the backing of Microsoft, it was a different issue altogether. Like out of a sudden, it was part of a bigger group of things we used anyways. So that's the interesting change there as well. So Dan, how about I call you a yellow belt for now? Like, do you want to have a cool job title like that as well?
I would love one, because do you know what? When I saw that, Julia, that was one of my first questions as well. As I was like, okay, that's really cool, but what's your actual job title? But that is your actual. That's so cool. Yeah. So yellow belt works for me. White belt even, Chris. I just want a belt.
Okay, fair enough. Have a belt. Get the whiskey out, kind of thing. I was actually in the meeting earlier. I've got a fancy water bottle right now, and I kid you not, this looks like a vodka bottle if you actually just put it up there. And I was sitting in the meeting and I was putting that thing up and pouring myself a drink, and everybody's like, "Okay," and I'm like,
"No, like, Chris, you have a hard day today. So what are you drinking?"
It's not vodka. It's not 4 o'clock yet. So no, it's really interesting how, yeah, as I said before, like if you put your coffee mug up and you blow onto it, nobody knows there's wine in there. So that's the other thing.
That's a pro move.
So one of the things we have a few resources to go through. I think we can do that, and then we can talk about the one thing that I wanted to cover with you, which is like the COBOL bits that you've been doing. But I think we can quickly go through some resources to actually just have a chat about different things that are happening at the moment. These resources are always things that don't actually make it to the newsletter because I can't get them in. But some of them will actually this Friday. So this is because I've got 5 things at the same time. I found this one interesting, that language migrations, when it comes to companies and people saying like we have to switch from one language to another, not like human languages, but actually like tech stack migrations, seem to be like that they're driven by hype. And 71% of experienced software, 71%, say their language migration decisions were influenced more by industry hype than proven outcomes. And there was another one as well that said like most of the time it was not worthwhile. I mean, you are helping companies or departments of the company to actually switch from one tech stack to another. Do you feel like there is a drive that we want to keep changing the tech stack, or is it just like that some smaller companies say like if we don't use the cool new stuff, we're falling behind?
So I have the feeling when a company is very technology driven, so their engineering department actually has an impact on business decisions, and there's this certain amount of developers that always read like Stack Overflow and Reddit, right, and get on to the big newest hype stuff. These organizations tend to have these decisions influenced more. But when you're looking into the more traditional organizations, they are usually not very driven by innovation. They are driven by what can our developers actually do. And in the most cases for banking and insurance, for example, this is Java, right? So, and I've never seen a real Java hype in the last 10 years, to be honest. It's just Java.
Well, Android gave it a boost, I think. And yeah, that was the big one. And then, of course, you got like all kind of like, I edited the videos of the Java stage as well. I don't know Java. And it was all about that, like, really product names, another product name on top of another product name and another package that you have to use. So I found that interesting. So, I mean, I've switched few projects from one stack to another, and I always found like oftentimes it was because of technology. You know, like that. For example, I remember one time at Yahoo, we created a new server farm in France, and like huge stack and everything, and like really cool machines. And then we actually realized that the interface, that the content management system that we've written in PHP doesn't support multi-core. So basically, all these boxes had like, we used the one core of the 16, and then we had to do something to virtualize the rest to do something useful with it. And that's why I see a lot of people moving from, for example, PHP to Go, or like from Perl to Go, to basically say like, okay, or to Rust even, to actually allow for newer hardware infrastructure to be fully supported. That's one thing where I saw that happening, and it was interesting to see like how due diligence can fail. That you basically build a whole server farm, and then you realize the code that we've written actually will not take at all the benefit, take all of these to the benefits. That basically just only a tenth of the server farm would be useful for us. So that's something that always cracks me up, like how something that can happen.
I mean, what the worst outcome is, what I also experienced before I joined Microsoft, is when you do like a technology-based decision. So we want to move from, back at the time, it was PLSQL into something more modern. And they chose Elixir at that time, Erlang and Elixir. And they were developing on that project for roughly 1.5 years, and then they decided that Elixir was not broad enough out there in the open source community, and they could not get really the resources and also the developers to support this project further. And they did like 100% rollback and gone back to PLSQL, because this was back then the only thing they could do, and it was suitable for the use case. They followed the hype, and then they needed to step back from that hype. Although the technical decision may have been the right one, the surroundings were just not right at that time, and they wasted basically 1.5 years of 2 dev teams developing full time. This is like millions of miners in the books.
Yeah, I mean, the other problem is, of course, like finding an Elixir engineer is probably much more expensive than finding somebody who's maintained your product for the last 20 years and they want to keep their job. Sometimes the pushback to change is job security. Yeah. It's an interesting bit, but I found that fascinating that somebody did a survey did an analysis on that one. Talking about like, I mean, the Stack Overflow survey just came out, and a lot of the findings in there are interesting. But I found that interesting that there's a hidden productivity tax in almost write AI code. And I find the same when I just basically use GitHub Copilot, which I use as my only editor AI thing. I don't use ChatGPT or anything like that. I use Claude from time to time, but mostly like I like my Visual Studio Code, and I started Copilot from the beginning, and I just got used to it. But it says like, okay, I'm writing things for you, and then basically the code, you see it generated, and then you just see it failing in between, and you're like, oh, wait, you're almost there. And most of the time you can't even intercept it, and then basically say like, actually, this is not right. Can you change that bit? And then it changes the whole code from the start again. It starts pulling all the other NPM packages in and these kind of things. Do you feel like there is a need for interception when it starts stopping, and like stop and go from there? And is this something that's supported already?
You can stop GitHub Copilot basically all the time, and then you can ask, okay, I noticed you're going into the wrong direction. Please take it from here into like another direction. I've seen that in GitHub Copilot Visual Studio Code Insiders, at least. I'm not sure if it's already in VS Code itself, but I've seen that it's working. But there are certain other like competitors who are actually trying to solve this problem, where you can basically, while the AI is working and it does not stop working, like when you stop GitHub Copilot and asking it, hey, can you go into another direction? You basically have like this interaction all the time. The interesting algorithm, I think, behind that is then to solve when AI is still working and you're typing in another prompt while AI is still working. How does the AI actually detect when is the smart moment to actually provide, to actually use this prompt the person has provided in that moment? And the same is true when you like to provide additional context, right? Or an additional tool or something like that. I haven't seen this solved in any product at all in a good way yet, but I think this is one of the next big things that will come, that we can basically interact with AI all the time, and it's then also considered almost in quotation marks, right? Real time.
I mean, Dan, it's probably the same with you. Like, it always fascinates me when I use a language that I'm not quite familiar with, and then like get like auto completion from an AI environment, and then it actually starts hallucinating function names that don't exist. Like,
Yeah.
so, I mean, I've seen CSS features that I'm like, oh, this would be so cool to have. Is that already in there? And then like, no, it wasn't.
Yeah, no, completely. I think, it's funny because I was just thinking then about how we call them sort of chatbots, but it's not, it's a strange way of chatting. It's kind of a really unnatural, because like you're saying, imagine if you said something and then I say, okay, now I'll respond to that. And you can't correct me. You can't update me on anything. You can't say, no, Dan, you've got that wrong, until I give my response. It would be a very sort of stilted way of communicating. And yeah, I think it does feel like that hopefully is the next thing to come, because I think that so much of if I'm ever using, I've been using Cursor, and I actually find that, it quite often it creates all these files. And then when you decide that you want to change direction, it's very difficult to do a cleanup of that. I mean, it's not very difficult. It's like you've got version control, so you can just roll back. But at the same time, you're finding that if you don't keep a very close watchful eye over it, it's just going to create a lot more than you want it to, even if it's something quite simple. So I think having that person there to the human beings knowing what they're looking at is obviously the key to it. But definitely being able to step in and stop it, but also knowing actually that when you say change direction, knowing that it's done a cleanup would be really useful, because there's so much extra stuff left in there at the moment. But yeah, it's frustrating.
Have you also noticed, so I noticed when I use different kind of models, so there are obviously models out there that are a lot more talkative, right? You notice already when you ask them a question and the answer is basically the triple the thing that you actually wanted to know, right? And when you use these models for coding, these are also super talkative. They write comments over a clean code function that you wouldn't have needed, for example. But when you're going down, I noticed it with the 01 mini back then, or the 03 mini back then, because it's just kind of a smaller model, and also the token limit is also a little bit smaller, that it tends to be, it's not deterministic, right? But it tends to be a little bit more precise, and it's also was not going off rails as much as a GPT-4o, for example, from my personal experience.
When there's specialized code models out there that basically you should use for that factor. I mean, that's why it scares the hell out of me when people just go to ChatGPT and ask it code questions, because it's the internet in a nutshell from like 5 years ago, rather than like optimized for proper code answers. You just mentioned clean code, and I was thinking about that earlier. It's very interesting that the generated code should always be like very, very optimized in a clean code idea, because when you actually have things where you don't know the outcome, where you're basically just vibing away, then like any function that is reliant on another is becoming a dependency, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I mean, clean code itself becomes kind of a religion. It's like I'm not too keen on it. I saw a few Uncle Bob talks, and it just scared me how his followers were like super excited about everything he said, and like how everything has to be that one way or another. I always found code to be more malleable than that, but at the same time, when it gets generated, it would be interesting to be able to say like follow the rules of this and that, and I guess that's where clever prompting comes in, right?
Yeah, and where you can also influence it with like a system prompt. For example, in GitHub Copilot, you have these Copilot instruction files now, right? Where you can basically tell it, hey, can you follow like the search JavaScript standard? And it then tries to follow out of the information that obviously have been trained into the model back then, tries to follow these instructions. But with these instructions files, where we just have now like a larger token window also for influencing system prompts, we could also put in basically all the information who are important for our engineering culture or for our engineering guidelines, maybe also architecture guidelines that need to be considered. But obviously, this is also additional overhead that we need to put in before we even start coding. So what my feeling is that we need to spend, talking about this article that you have opened, right? The tags we need to invent more time to actually prepare for coding than we maybe did before. Before we opened an issue or like a feature ticket, we read it, we tried to understand it, maybe circling back with our product manager to get clarity, and then we started coding. Today we are reading the issue ticket, we need to understand it, and then we need to bring it into like a format where AI is maybe also able to understand it, if we do not want to start like on the green grass, but also want to AI also do like the first iteration of what we want to try to do. So it basically lengthens up the whole phase where we start to begin coding, right?
We chatted a bit before the show. It seems like the whole, when people get super excited how many lines of code they generated with AI, it actually scares the hell out of me, because the amount of code is not really any measure of quality or actually sensibility. The best code is the one you didn't write because you did have proper specs, or you actually thought through before you actually put that feature in that you have to pull out again. And the whole it seems wasteful to actually get AI to write a lot of stuff that it then needs to delete in an optimization step again. But I guess it's better than asking your engineers to do it and then having to delete it again. But it still feels like we're taking the best approaches of the worst approaches of development and telling AI to follow them. Yeah. Like, you wouldn't tell a developer to just start coding without thinking about the solution first, right?
Yeah. Also, back in the days when customers were like weirdly obsessed that we get like 100% test coverage of code, right? 100% test coverage never guaranteed that your code was basically bug-free. But they strongly believed that, and forced developers to spend actually a lot of time to achieve this 100% of test coverage, instead of writing smart tests to actually test edge cases, who are like the most important ones. And I think this is like the same now with like this immense amount of lines of code that we are producing. Someone needs to be aware what actually is written in that code. It needs to be quality code. It needs still to be readable by humans, because the humans are the one that need to review it. And we also had this before we started the live, right? We need to apply even stricter security measurements on AI generated code, because we need to keep it in control somehow.
Which brings us to this one, and that was interesting that basically Sketch had an outage, and it was basically because LLM code was generated, and that basically, I love that they made it public and they explained all the things what went wrong here and what the root causes were. But it still scares me that basically we generate code without knowing it. That's a bit like using packages without vetting them. And yeah, it's interesting that this is the first case where they made it public. I mean, there's quite sure that lots of outages were caused by like randomly generated code, but I love that they actually explained what the issues are and what happened and how they found it as well. But there is
I'm wondering, Julia. I'm just wondering then, Julia, about what you were saying about rules, about the instruction files and the rules files, because I've sort of seen them, people talk about them saying, just put this markdown file, set all of the rules, let the AI kind of see it, say to it like, take a look at this file, in your context and things like this. But I wonder how much of this will be solved by that, because it feels like that's the next step for people, sort of mainstream awareness. Like people need to know about these, right? The rules files and the instructions, and insiders are, and very technical people are, but it's really the vibe coders this is going to protect, right? The people who have no idea what they're looking at. And I just wonder when you're showing this, Chris, about, would this have been fixed by a rule? If the LLM knew not to do certain things, or are they just things that are such edge case things you can't predict?
So
You're not convinced?
As LLMs are trained on human code, right? Human code that is written on GitHub, and humans build security issues into code all the time. We actually cannot rely on AI to actually fix that. We need deterministic versionable tools to help us secure our code the same way. It doesn't really matter if the code is written by AI or a human. We just need these deterministic measurements on that code to prevent that secrets are pushed, to prevent that we use outdated dependencies with vulnerabilities inside it, like log4j, for example, or that we actually have like code smells inside of our code. And this is actually something that at least I currently see, and I don't trust AI 100%. It's not deterministic. I would not do that with the help of AI. It can support, obviously, all the time, especially when the fixes for the code are that simple that an AI can just generate it to fix that problem. But the whole like measurement, I would not do that with AI right now.
Yeah, it feels trusting the machine too much. And like it's interesting when you said like these rule files and everything. There's now somebody says like you have to have a cursor.md file to basically onboard the AI developer in your project. And I'm like, what are we doing here? Like, I mean, this should be easy for us to actually get these things to do things, but there's MCPs out there to actually stop loops from happening, so that your bill will go through the roof, and these kind of things, like when an agent is out there that just reads new files over and over again, and these kind of things. So it seems like we're trusting too much that the magic will happen. And I hope that there will be a lot of like cases like this where people realize like, no, that's not a way to do that. You cannot just replace your engineers with a script or with a bot that basically does it, because this is the kind of stuff that can happen with it. Yeah. Which brings me to the other finding in the developer survey as well, where basically that trust in AI coding tools is falling as usage rises. And I think there's several audiences here. I think like the cool new vibe coder that just embraces everything and works for a startup where the product can change every day or needs to change every day, they have less of a problem. But I saw that over the last month, a lot of companies shoehorned AI into their company just to be like seen as somebody who is innovating. And they had like happy developers with their stack doing the day-to-day job and changing every 3 months those 2 buttons on that insurance website. That's totally fine to have that way. And now they're asked to vibe code and AI code, and they found like the generated code, debugging that one costs them more time than actually writing the code themselves in the first place. So it seems like this is a thing that is happening right now, where we have to start differentiating who can benefit from these bleeding edge technologies, or where it's just annoying for your engineers to be forced to use these things. That was always the same with every technology, when people like, oh, you got to use Flash, or you got to have a mobile phone website. They have a mobile app instead of a website, or these kind of things, like where people were always asked to embrace new technology because they became mainstream in the media rather than they solved a real issue. I found a lot of times I start something small that I know I can do in an hour, and then let's vibe code it, and then it was 3 hours of telling the machine not to do the thing that I want that it did, because it's more optimized.
Yeah, but I have a feeling sometimes when you talk about organizations that now start to use AI and to vibe code to just be innovative, oftentimes this decision is not done by the developers, right? We have management that reads articles and it's like, oh, we need to do this, right, to be productive and innovative. And then they push this tech stack on top of the developers, and then they start to measure the daily active usage. It's actually also something that we do at Microsoft, daily active usage of Microsoft Copilot, to just have an idea how much it's actually used. And when your team is then in some kind of a statistic where it shows, hey, we now bought this AI coding tool, Cursor or Copilot or whatever, and we see you're not using it, and then they try to draw conclusions to your productivity behind that. The truth is it really related? We don't know yet, right? We start to get statistics now over a little bit more to really get an idea if AI is actually helping us getting more productive in day-to-day tasks, but also in coding. But it clearly differs from the target group, what you mentioned, right? We have like the senior devs who can do it in an hour anyway, right? They don't need AI. But what about the mid-level and junior devs? And what is also like the impact on the whole like learning of mid-level and junior devs? Back when I was a junior dev, I learned from pain, and I learned from a senior developer who take a lot of time to actually explain me things, why it was so painful just learning that. But today, this is not the truth anymore, right? Junior developers just ask an AI to give them the basic outline, and then they try to debug it. And if they fail, the whole load and the whole responsibility falls back onto the senior devs anyway, who need to do the code review and also the whole quality assurance of the product. So what we are creating is we're creating like a huge bottleneck on the shoulders of on top of these seniors developers who don't only need to babysit the mid-level and juniors, who now also need to babysit AI.
Yeah, and I mean, like getting a junior in check is easier than getting a machine in check that the company paid a lot of money for, right?
True.
I'm wondering if there's a positive spin on that, though. I'm wondering if actually it just got me thinking, about like whether what if, I don't know, I'm thinking this out loud a little bit, but if our role changes and that mostly it's reviewing code, then you would think that the smart way to spend your time is on learning, so that you can review that code and actually know what you're looking at. But my worry with that is that the final part of learning is like, okay, I know all this information, now I need to use it and now I need to apply it, but we're never really applying it because we're not actually writing code anymore. So I'm trying to sort of almost put an optimistic spin on it that maybe we will just use AI to do a lot more learning, but I'm still in the back of my mind going, but will we, because of the fact that we're not actually learning it by applying it,
Yeah. Totally agree. I mean, there's this saying that you have first understand something really when the first time you explain it to someone else, right? And this is not happening anymore because AI is basically explaining us everything, and then we try to understand.
Yeah, and I mean, there's also the paradox of optimization for performance. Like, we use these tools to actually save time, and then like, what do we do with the time left over? Like, we could use that to allow our engineers to train, to learn things, to understand what the language is about, to understand the basics. Like, because I think to become a code reviewer, you have to have made a lot of mistakes yourself. You actually have to have the pain of like realizing this is shit. We shouldn't do it that way, and or the like that loop costs me that much amount of RAM that I didn't think of. Like these kind of things, we never get the chance to do that. But we are always optimizing our time to then free time for what? For creating more code that nobody needs, rather than just training our engineers or allowing our engineers to actually get acquainted with the technology. And I would love companies to actually understand that basically if you're spending money on technology to make your developers more efficient, use that time for them to teach themselves and each other. Like that's when I always forced my companies to give us time to actually give talks to each other in the engineering team, to do like lightning talks, to do like hack days where we just played with our projects and like work them around, and not like, okay, now we optimized your happiness, your developer happiness, and now make more stuff rather than like understand what you're doing.
Yeah, so I remember 2 years ago when GitHub Copilot really got the first real hype, and it was like GPT-4 back then. One CEO asked me, Julia, how many developers can I lay off when I now use GitHub Copilot, right? And I was shaking at that time. I was like, the audacity to ask me that. But this is the current reality we are facing, right? They are not laying off developers, but they actually expect the developers to just produce more code. And then we are circling back to what we had before. Is more code better? And the answer is usually no.
No. Well, I mean, that also ties back to the whole idea of the full stack developer, which I still think is a myth. I still don't think that there's anybody that can cover the whole stack and actually be an expert in all the bits or know what not to do to not cause an outage. Like when people said like, oh yeah, you're a full stack developer, that's fucking amazing. And you're like, well, that basically means you want to hire one person instead of three.
Yeah.
And I've never seen the most, I just swear, sorry. the most effective teams I've seen were teams of T-shaped developers, people that actually knew the breadth of the product, but also were experts in one of them. And they actually working together and coding together and actually finding things out. Me sitting down together with a designer as a front end guy and basically just, oh, look at that. This is what I can do. Oh, could you also do that? You know, like the back and forth between experts was a thing that made the product so much better. But nowadays we just say, like, let's optimize all of that and create an agent that you have a design agent that can answer your questions.
Yeah, and also like a full stack developer is not only development anymore. When you are a full stack developers, they also expect you to be like an expert in Kubernetes and containerization and distributed systems and cloud, every cloud possibly, right? And on-premise systems and networking. And how should a single person actually do that? I also never met a person who was like the best in everything. But I've met very good people who are like very dedicated to front end or back end, and they work very effectively together.
I think if you have to cover the whole stack, you cannot be passionate about any of it.
Yeah.
And passion to me makes quality.
Yeah.
Interesting. I asked that on social media earlier as well. Like, one of the things in the Stack Overflow survey was web frameworks and technologies and the usage of it. And I love that Node.js is, of course, the big winner. React is next, but then is jQuery before all the others.
Yeah, I pasted it earlier in a group chat to my colleagues, and we could not believe it. It's 2025, and jQuery is still on place 3. But have you also seen that Notepad++ in the IDEs is also on place 3? This is almost more. It's almost as shocking as jQuery, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, it may give a point about who uses Stack Overflow. That might be an insight there as well. But I mean, the jQuery usage, I'm not surprised, because basically every WordPress instance comes with jQuery. And if you have to maintain that, then probably you do it. I mean, jQuery to me was the first kind of vibe coding thing. Like, it took the complexity of JavaScript away by making it easier to interact with the DOM. But it also allowed you to shoot yourself in the foot in a wonderful new fashion. You know, like, people just didn't understand that if you do a $$a dot click, it created event handlers on every single link in that page, rather than one event delegated link on top of the main element. It didn't optimize under the hood, which is something I would have loved it to do, but it was basically allowing you to run roughshod through the DOM and then wondering why your thing didn't perform. So,
I mean, we had nothing else back then, right? React did not exist at that time when jQuery appeared. And we needed a solution to make JavaScript more simple, and jQuery was the solution back then. And this is why it's a theory, where it's still heavily in use, because we haven't just. Why would we modernize an application that's running, right? This is the whole reasoning behind that. To like React or Vue or Angular or something, if it's just a simple web application that runs perfectly with jQuery, although you have like an event handler for every single letter that you type into an input field.
I mean, I worked on YUI back then, and there was MooTools, and there was like all kind of, I mean, Dojo, there were like, but when I wrote for Ajaxian, we found 127 different Ajax frameworks that made JavaScript easier. And all of them died because of jQuery was the one that actually told you to do more with less. So that's the kind of like the same carrot we hear with AI and vibe coding now. So it seems like every single time something like that wins is by basically telling people, oh, don't worry about it. We make it work for you. And that always scares me, that like I don't trust it.
And it's a nice promise, right? This is what we always want. Developers are always lazy, and they always try to find a way to do the things that they do in an easier manner. So in jQuery is one example, and AI is another example. And in the next 10 years, there will be probably more of these examples actually standing around the corner waiting for us.
Something for Dan. Google released a new font called Google Sans.
I knew it was for me. When I saw that, I thought, oh, that's right up my street. And then I was like, I've fallen for it. He's put that in there for me. Yeah, I love it.
Do you optimize? Do you set up your editor a lot with different ligatures and fonts and colors, or do you just use what comes out of the box with VS Code, Julia?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I thought that was for me. Go for it, Julia.
No, sir. Okay, please answer first. How do we?
No, your answer will be far more interesting. Over to you.
No, I don't. I don't at all. I use the basic dark theme of VS Code because everything. So I saw a developer at a hackathon a few months ago. She had like a whole like pink VS Code setup, also with like blinking font here and there. But it's too overwhelming for me. We also had a little bit before. I'm a little bit on the neurodivergent side. So everything that's blinking or extra special, or I took a lot of time to hyperfixate to actually make it better, it really brings me out of the focus zone that I really need to work properly when I'm actually coding.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same, to be honest with you. I do go for different themes. I can't lie. I try out a different theme every now and then, but then I find that the syntax highlighting using different colors like is confusing. I know it's really strange because it's consistent, you know, in terms of it will always highlight like a variable in the same way, but it's the fact that I've gotten used to certain colors that when I change it, I then end up going back because I'm like, oh, this feels weird. I can't get used to it. It looks strange. I don't understand how anybody, you know, it's like that meme though, people using like calligraphy fonts in their VS Code. There will be someone out there that's actually using that. Wow, Chris, how do you find these things? That wow.
I'm blinded.
That is my favorite. That's my favorite theme of VS Code, and it's actually the backstory is that this was an official theme of Windows 3.11. So you could actually set the whole operating system to this theme. It was called Hot Dog Stand. And I still don't know who got that through with Microsoft back then to release it as a theme for the whole operating system, because it's just wrong on every level.
I would love to see statistics around that. Who really downloaded it and who was using it just for a joke for like 1 minute and then switched back to another theme. This would be a statistic I really would be interested in.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, who's actively got it?
This was Windows 3.11. There were no statistics because you normally were offline with your operating system. That was the problem then. Like
back then.
But yeah, it's an interesting bit that there's always the one font to end all fonts, and it's great to do. And I mean, I can invite people that work on Google Fonts to actually on this show to actually talk us through what the things are. But I don't know. I mean, this is one thing I loved as well. And we had that discussion as well, Dan. Like when I launched 17 side projects, what is the result? I'm rich in expired domains.
Oh, it's so true, isn't it? It's like, all right, I'll be honest. I've got loads of domains that I've bought, and then sometimes I don't even know what I was going to use them for. It was more of like I wonder if that's available. And then I check and it is, and I buy it. And then I immediately forget until it auto renews a year later. It does feel sometimes like people are just collecting domains. And I mean, remember, Chris, you said something like, if you've got a list of domains after your name, if you're somebody with like, here's 15, somebody even had it in like a read more on their profile where it was like the list was so long. You probably aren't maintaining them. I don't know how you've got time to maintain them. And then it feels dodgy because it feels like you're saying to people, here's a new SaaS, pre-order or buy now, but then you're not maintaining it. And so what have they really bought? I don't know. Maybe it's just from the outside. It can feel a little bit dodgy.
I feel exactly the same. So when when I'm at the third side project, I already forget about the first one, right? So there's no way I can hold it all in my head, and I immediately forget about it. And even if let's imagine this side project kind of blows up and people start to use it for whatever reason, and then they suddenly ask you to help them with a bug, or they open like a pull request and want to participate, and you look at it like for the first time, right? Like you have not written this project at all, but unfortunately your name is as a maintainer on this project. You have no idea what you're doing.
So relatable. That's happened to me right now, actually. You know, I've got a GitHub profile generator. I haven't touched it for about a year. I looked and I was like, God, the last time I even looked at a pull request was getting on for a year. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to go back to it. And I've spent the last sort of few weeks, you know, I just sort of go, right, I'm going to do one pull request or one issue. And it was exactly that. It was like you said, I was opening things up and going, I can't even remember what this looks like. And it's because you're starting something new that seems more interesting, but there's something really fun about returning to that old project and giving it life and remembering why you did it in the first place, right? It's like you still love it, and giving it something new kind of reinvigorates it.
I mean, you kind of see the Batman sign on a ceiling, right? And you're like, this is my sign, but you can't help it.
I love that guy that basically built a blog with C preprocessor macros, seeing that you can always go back to the most old stack and weird stack, and you can still maintain things on the web. Which kind of brings me to the main topic that I wanted to talk to you about, because your talk at our event, and also the one that we covered here, is that you are actually helping people to put COBOL projects into the cloud using GitHub Copilot. Is that right?
Partly. So we were coming from that angle of GitHub Copilot, because GitHub Copilot is kind of the crown jewels of AI Microsoft coding, right? So back in end of 2023, I was at an automotive customer, and they had a hackathon, and they had like a COBOL team, and we tried to just reason with GPT-4 back then about what are we actually seeing here, because they were like in a huge problem that I'm talking about a hype. Like COBOL migrations is not a hype, it's like a real threat, because the people who wrote COBOL back then, they're dying, literally. So we are in an unfortunate situation, or the organizations that still have COBOL are in an unfortunate situation that they actually have to do something about it. So we tried, and now we have AI, right? And AI is the solution for everything. This is at least what we are thinking. And we were trying to make, at the first place, actually make sense out of it. Can AI help us at least get an understanding? So doing like the reverse engineering of that business logic in COBOL files. And back then, with GPT-4, single model agent mode did not exist, right? We did not even know how to do function calling with LLMs back then. It was kind of a pity, because the token sizes were very small for the models, and we could not put everything in that we actually needed to put in to actually give the model a chance to actually reason about it in a central way. And then it was basically like the project died. Also, it was like an interesting hackathon project, but also the customer did not follow up on that. And then we were thinking about, okay, now we have GitHub Copilot, and we have agent mode in GitHub Copilot, or back there it was edit mode, when we started to edit multiple files. And also the token windows of the LLMs behind GitHub Copilot, they got more specific to coding, right? And they were bigger. So then we tried to actually make sense with GitHub Copilot to do these reverse engineering tasks. And it kind of works. It's not bad compared to back then, end of 2023. It's actually not bad, but we noticed that when customers approach us with this problem, they're like, Julia, we need to get rid of our mainframe. And I'm like, all right, where do we want to start, right? They are not looking for an AI in the loop solution. They are looking to paste their code somewhere, click, magic appears in seconds, and then they have like functioning Java or .NET or whatever code, and their mainframe is gone. But this is actually not a reality we are facing right now. It doesn't matter which AI tool, and also doesn't matter if you're basically creating your own multi-agentic approach. It's always like an iteration, because it's obviously also not deterministic, and a lot of the COBOL code also is not very much speaking for itself. So there's no documentation. A lot of the COBOL code is also in foreign languages that are not English, so also models have trouble actually understanding it. And this is how we try to actually make sense out of it. So the first steps we did was with GitHub Copilot, asking GitHub Copilot to have a look at the project. What could it actually pull out of the project in terms of business logic? How is actually the dependencies between these COBOL files? But then we had like the problem that we also wanted to convert it, right? And there are solutions already out there for years, right? We have like large partner organizations like Kyndryl in the US is one big one, also Accenture here in Europe, who are doing these mainframe migration for years. And they mostly do it either with man and women power who have suited with COBOL code or mainframe code, or they do it with code generators. But we all know code that's coming out of code generators is usually far beyond reading, and we have no idea what's actually happening. So we tried to target this from different angles. Can we actually do like a full reverse engineering of COBOL code and generate just from the files that we maybe generate as described the business logic, generate code out of that? Or can we use the COBOL code itself as a source and transform it into Java code in our case? Or can we actually use this auto-generated code that we maybe already have and try to make sense out of that and convert it into human-readable code? So these were the three angles we were coming from. And unfortunately, in the moment, GitHub Copilot is not suitable of doing that. And this is why we actually started to write our own multi-agentic framework in semantic kernel. I did it with one of my GBB colleagues, Gustav. But then we had like all these good ideas and all these good intentions. The only problem was we did not have proper COBOL code. Because it turns out there are a few resources in GitHub of COBOL code. There's like a certain book out there which is like COBOL code for programmers, who basically is like a teaching book for COBOL, which is already like 20 years old. And there's also from AWS, there's like a mainframe demo code also on GitHub, but nothing more. So we were desperately craving actually for a customer who wants to collaborate with us and provide us code to actually test all the wild and funny theories we had on. And this is how we found Banter, who is like a conglomerate of Danish. So they are providing IT for Danish banks. And they were like kind of experimental, and they were like, well, let's give it a try. And this is how we actually tried to approach this problem. So we started with like one agent separately, and also the one agent in GitHub Copilot. And then we slowly expanded it in kind of a hackathon with the customer together into like a multi-agentic approach with orchestration and everything. And this then ended up, I don't want to say ended up because the project has not ended, but it's currently in a good state where we actually published it on GitHub under Azure Samples for everyone to try. And we are very proud of that. And this is what the talk was actually about, how we actually got there.
It's interesting because there is the issue that you said people are literally dying, but they're also just going into pension and they're becoming pensioners. I mean, but that's where the German government helps us by pushing that age every year for like another 5 years. But the problem with it is like that code was never uploaded anywhere because it was on a mainframe. And I also found that both with Fortran and with COBOL, it's very much hardware optimized. It's depending on which mainframe it's running on, AS400 or whatever, that basically you cannot convert it from one to the other. So it's basically code written by somebody they logged into an office and told them to maintain that for the next 30 years. They never had a chance to actually do it. And this is really interesting because if you had languages that in between, like, I mean, that's why JavaScript code generation is much better, because it was online from the very get-go, and it was open source from the very get-go. Like most of these languages, they never had their internal SVN repositories or mercurial repositories, but it never got into GitHub. It never got into the public. So there was no way for these code agents to learn about these languages. But it's a very, very big thing that needs to happen right now. And it will be interesting to see if we can do a call out here, like who else has COBOL code or Fortran code or any of these legacy code out there. Please at least put them on GitHub for indexing, or just send them to this team to actually take a look at it, because you can only learn from code that's out there. But if on the highly optimized language like COBOL, it's tricky because there's no generic code you can write.
Yeah, there's no generic code. No COBOL code looks the same, because back then, it was also with Java at the time, 20 years ago, where we thought we had the audacity that we could do large programming languages better by putting a front end on top, or like a framework on top of it, like a company-wide framework to just make it better, right? And this is why this is the same for COBOL code, actually. So every COBOL code, and I see also PL1 code, they kind of have like their own slang and their own way of working. So it's really important that we get more resources out there to actually help AI make sense out of it. And there was also something else that I want to say. I'm talking about like that COBOL and PL1 and Fortran and everything is so closely tied to the hardware, right? The problem is here that we cannot treat every COBOL code as like the same way migratable, because sometimes we have non-functional requirements. So this input-output pattern, for example, or thread safety, or like this 100% safety of rolling back like process on the mainframe that we have, and also like these very fast processing of large amounts of data. When we want to try to think this new and trying to optimize the hell out of it in Microsoft or cloud way of thinking, we want to cloud native. How can we actually apply these non-functional requirements to a distributed system on a Kubernetes? The answer is we can, but it's not easy. We really need to think this through. So migrating, getting the business logic out of that is the one thing, but actually making sense of the architecture behind that and non-functional requirements is like a completely different topic. And I don't know about you, so I tried a few AI tools now, and none of them is really good at doing software architecture or software design in a very good way, but with a lot of help. And this is also something we are currently facing with this multi-agentic framework in semantic kernel that we created. Having like an agent only taking care of system design, it's tricky. It's really hard.
Well, it's the one thing where basically you have like senior engineers still fight for their jobs, so to say. Like, I mean, it's but I mean, when you get like companies that are AI first, they actually say that like the job is to write a good spec, to write a good system design, and then let the code generate it from there. But I mean, how do you reach that level? How do you get into that knowledge if you haven't written code before? That's the endless thing there. Like it's a very bizarre world that we're in, where we get applauded for generating lots of lines of code, but we don't get applauded for thinking before we actually start coding.
Yeah, it's also like a hen and egg problem, right? We try to generate good prompts, that these good prompts generate us good code. But what does good code look like? And do we need code to actually generate good prompts, to generate more good prompts, to generate good code? Where do you actually start to solve this problem?
Well, it's tricky, but it's interesting to see that there is an approach to that, because I remember when I joined Microsoft in 2015, we looked at like how can we get old COBOL environments or old mainframe environments onto the cloud, and there was no way to automatically convert that. And hopefully, with like more learning and more data coming in, there is a way to actually make that happen, because we're dependent on that stuff. I mean, it's easy to make fun of it, but actually most of the infrastructure that's necessary for day-to-day lives, banks, environments, like insurances, the things that you actually need to connect with real life, not like, oh, my game doesn't work, is all really relying on very, very old infrastructure and very, very old code.
Yeah, and this is not only true for COBOL, right? A lot of core business applications at the most European organizations, at least that I see, are legacy applications. They may not be COBOL, but they may be a Java outdated like 10 years ago, and it's still running, or like whole like server infrastructures who still rely on Windows XP or something like that. Obviously, this is like
Windows 2000,
yeah, this is like an infrastructure problem and not a code problem, but usually these go hand in hand. We usually tend to stick to these old OSs because we have these old applications still need to be able to run on them.
Well, we're out of time, and we're both actually on the run because we have to get trains and stuff. That was great. Thank you so much, Julia. How can people help you with this project? And I mean, is it a side project for you, or do you also get like resources from the company to concentrate on that now?
No, it's a side quest. It's a side. So we as GBBs, we always have side quests, and this is a side quest of Gustav and me. So when you would like to help us with this project, maybe you also want to talk to us, you can go to the repository and maybe open like an issue and provide us your contact data. Or if you're already in touch with Microsoft, you maybe can connect with your Microsoft account team and they can try to connect us. Or if nothing of that is applicable to you, reach out to me on LinkedIn and we can have a chat.
Cool. Dan, any last words from you?
I'd just like to see maybe if there's any kind of write-up on that or anything like that comes out. It'd be good for us to kind of share it and make sure that people can see that, because anything you can share about how that works.
Article, we can totally link it.
That'd be great. Yeah, so we'll share that along with this. But no, other than that, safe travels to you both. Hope it all goes well this week. You've got conferences, right? I know, Chris, you have, and Julia, have you got one as well?
Yeah, I've going onto like a tech camp, a chaos communication camp in the Netherlands. It's like vacation, but it's also work, kinda. But at least there's 24 degrees and sun, right? This is the important part.
That sounds boiling to me in the UK.
Well, it's 23 degrees, but after tax and paperwork, it's 16 in Germany. So,
Thank you so much for having me. It was a blast.
Thanks so much, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Take care.